For the last 3 years, I've been travelling the world to discover and tell the incredible story of how beer built and changed the world. From the dusty dunes of the Egyptian desert to the frozen wilderness of Arctic Svalbard, as well as more likely places like Munich's beer halls and St. Louis's beer cathedrals. I've come to believe that the creation of beer and wider fermentation is as important to human development as the discovery of fire. The list of achievements made in the pursuit of better beer is mind-bending. We invented refrigeration to keep lager cellars cool, adopted pasteurisation to keep beer fresh, and laid railways to take it places quicker. Beer has inspired some other great discoveries, including germ theory of disease, and brewer's yeast is now used to create vaccines, insulin, and even biofuels. All along, breweries have sponsored sports and TV, funded political parties, and influenced cultures and cuisines. All these stories and many more are told in my new book, The Meaning of Beer, out on the 7th of November 2024. Buy your copy today, right after you watch this week's episode inspired by one of the chapters.
We're going to need some big beers for this episode, Bradley. The theme might be hard for people at home to guess.
Yeah, there's different nations in there, Johnny.
Different nations, different styles, different sizes.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I say, we're going to need big beers because I'm going to throw some stuff at you that's going to make you want to drink.
Not the big beers, hopefully.
Well, today we're going to be talking about beer and religion.
Oh.
And as I pour this most special of beers, one of our favourites in the world, I'm going to ask you, did you know that the blueprint for the pyramids
Go on.
was a brewery?
Maybe.
Great Pyramid of Giza.
Was it an alien brewery?
No, we're not going to go that far down a rabbit hole, but we are going to go deep into the desert of Egypt, a place called Abydos,
Abydos,
where I was this January.
Nice.
Exploring and looking for one of the oldest commercial breweries on Earth, built around 3000 BC.
So 5,000 years ago.
5,000 years ago, by Namer, the king that united Egypt.
Wow. It's pretty cool.
And he built a brewery that would be able to create more beer per year than Fuller's Brewery today. 5,000 years ago.
Ancient aliens, man.
Ancient aliens. And that is not even the earliest records we have of beer.
Yeah.
But when we get back to then, what is always found when it comes to beer production is some element of religion. And that is what we're talking about today as we drink a quad well into double digits. What's the earliest record we have of beer?
Well, that's 5,000 years
Yeah.
ago. Probably, I don't know, 8,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 20,000
No,
years
okay,
ago?
no, too far.
15?
13,000 years ago is the oldest record or evidence we have of brewing.
Okay.
It was a place called the Rakafet Cave in Israel, not far from Nazareth.
Yeah.
And it is a cave, right? And within this cave, we have divots in the floor and divots in some rocks towards the edge of it. And we have, using modern technology, discovered both sort of essentially barley and wheat residue.
So they're milling it.
They've been milling it in there. And also, what I think are called striations, like marks in the rock from the tools that they were using to do it. And so we have found basically that they were definitely brewing in these caves 13,000 years ago, probably wheat beers, wildly inoculated yeasts, quick fermented, low ABV stuff. That in itself is incredible. It means that beer is nearly as old as bread, possibly older. That debate, which one came first, is still raging as a result of that discovery. Bread, the earliest record we have of bread is in Jordan about 1,000 years before. But I think in both sites, the technology, the knowledge is so advanced that it's kind of inconceivable it hadn't been happening before. We just haven't found earlier evidence of it. But what's really interesting and feeds into all of this is that cave was also used for ritualistic burials. So we found that brewing was happening right next to where they were burying their dead. So we found skeletons, we found evidence of like floral sort of wreaths and stuff like that. So we think that beer was part of the death rituals for the Natufian people that we believe were in that cave. Sort of a semi-sedentary, travelled a bit, but had places they'd go to and stay during certain times of the year. And that is the earliest evidence we have, not just of brewing, but of religion's place in it. So right up until pretty much when some of these beers were being brewed, religion was still a hugely important part of brewing. And that was because, as we've talked about a lot on the channel, as everybody talks about a lot, beer was safe water, essentially.
Yes.
And not just that, that's been slightly overplayed, particularly in places with plenty of fresh water. It was great calories, it was filling, it was more kind of like porridge than beer as we know it today, because we didn't filter it, we just either ate the grain or sucked the water from between the grains. And so it was beer, bread, foraged stuff that was our diet for thousands and thousands of years. And as a result of that kind of life-giving quality that it had, and because we didn't know the process that was happening, we didn't understand that yeast was eating sugar to create alcohol, which was an antiseptic, we assumed it was a gift from God. So we assumed that when we combined these things, and even had religious beliefs around certain pots being blessed and all this kind of stuff, which was actually just that pot had some nice yeast in there, or nice bacteria. Because of that, we considered beer kind of holy. Whatever the religion was all over the world, we considered beer a gift from God. So just predating that brewery at Abydos, we have to talk about the Sumerians, because the Sumerians of Mesopotamia, so essentially modern day Iraq, they were the first to write about beer. So in 13,000 BC, we're scraping at rock and looking under a microscope. The Sumerians are writing about it. They were the first people to develop written language.
Yeah, cuneiform.
Exactly. And some of the first tablets examples we have of writing are actually receipts for the sale of beer.
Shopping lists.
Well, receipts rather than you wouldn't make a shopping list out of a tablet and then carry that around the shop. They're receipts of beer that's been purchased. There's a great video, I'll put the link in the description box, to the first ever recorded mathematical mistake, which was also about the buying of beer in ancient Sumeria. But we also have, along with sort of these receipts, we have evidence of the tale of Gilgamesh, in which so that's a story of a king who goes looking for eternal life, and he sort of learns that the things that make us human, he says, are beer is one of them, sex is one of them, and oil rubs.
Kinky.
Yeah,
Sounds
like a lovely afternoon, to be fair.
Gilgamesh was kinky.
Yeah, apparently so. So we've got the Epic of Gilgamesh mentions beer. We've also got what most people all know, which is sort of the tablet that shows people drinking straws. We reckon the straw was invented for beer. The oldest ones we have are about 8,000 years old, I think. Actually, I think in Russia somewhere. They're these big ornamental gold or brass straws that initially we thought were tent poles. They're that long.
Wow.
But they'd have been used to put into the big vat of grainy beer and suck the liquid out.
Wow.
And we've got sort of a smaller version of that in the tablets from Mesopotamia. And then we have the poem to Ninkasi, which is the first beer recipe, which describes actually a recipe that was making beer from old bread. So you'd soak like stale bread, you'd add honey and flavours and water, and then you'd leave it, and the Ninkasi / the yeast would get to work and turn it into an alcoholic, delicious beverage. So we put that down to Ninkasi, but it was the yeast doing it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of sensationalized and immortalized by these tablets. And, it's not easy to do writing back in those days, and people wanted to talk about the beer. It was important that was handed down generation to generation. Narmer, 3000 BC, in Egypt. He, incredibly, at this brewery, which is in the middle of the desert, I had to be escorted out by a guard with a very large gun to meet the people who were digging this up. An amazing archaeologist called Dr. Matthew Adams and his team. They'd found that this brewery could make the same amount a year as Fuller's, but nobody was drinking the beer. They have found one cup on the whole archaeological site of Abydos, which was the original religious site, like before sort of Valley of the Kings and stuff. And that cup was found in a fermenter. So that was clearly dropped by a brewer by accident.
So this was just for offerings?
This was all, exactly. So the temples of the kings like Narmer, they would have been brewing this beer and pouring it out at festivities and eventually at his funeral, and then burying it with him to go to the afterlife. So yeah, nobody apart from the brewers and possibly the king drank this beer.
What a waste.
It feels like a waste, but I think that shows
the sacredness of it.
Exactly, and the fervour and the devoutness of these people. You know, we found also around the only surviving temple in there called the Shinet al-Zaib, we found evidence of people being sacrificed. Courtiers would be murdered, sent to the afterlife with their king. There's no sign of struggle, you know, like there's no broken bones, damaged bones from them trying to get away. It seems that they would happily have their throats cut. Maybe a little bit of buyer's regret as it's happening.
Maybe they had a little bit of beer.
Or maybe they had some beer before. Yeah, maybe they were offered some straight from the jug, straight from the fermenter. It's all big. Snow is the best way to. Yeah, why are your necks open?
Wow, interesting.
So we know that they were hugely devout and that they fully believed that the beer they either poured out on the floor or buried was going to the afterlife with the king. I say it was the blueprint for the pyramids. So you look at the shape of this brewery. So it makes up 8 long lines that had pots in there, and they'd light a fire in between them, put a lid on, and it would brew thousands and thousands of litres of beer. Raked sides out of the pyramids. You then look at the temple that would have been built, that was built about 200-300 years after that. Steeper raked sides. You then look at the step pyramid a couple of hundred years later. It's just like a modern pyramid. The Great Pyramids, 2,500, but in steps like this. And eventually the steps become flattened out, and you get what we know as the Great Pyramid of Giza and the 2 next to it. So it was both the design of that raked side, it was also the infrastructure that was needed. So they were slowly building greater, more incredible feats of engineering, and that started with this brewery 3,000 years ago and the other buildings around it, in terms of, you know, getting the people together to do it, in terms of the architects, the engineers, the designers, the builders, the quarriers. You have to think about the human endeavour that went into that. The amount of wheat, it would have been Emma wheat, that would have been brought up from the Nile, 10 kilometres away. The water brought up from the Nile.
Yeah, I was going to say, these are all like precious resources for life.
And wood in a desert, not easy to come by.
No.
So everything that went into brewing that and everything that went into building that was building the infrastructure that the Egyptians became famous for, the incredible stuff they built. And I explored it, and there'll be some B-roll here because I filmed some of it. Just extraordinary what they were capable of. And that all started with the foundation of a temple and a brewery at Abydos.
Just shows you the different relationship they had towards life and death, and like what both of those things mean, and how much. I mean, that sounds like that was probably the life's work of a small or a large workforce of people.
Yeah.
Building this thing their whole lives.
Yeah, 30 years.
To like.
And they never saw it finished. Probably.
They never saw it finished, and then all this stuff is offerings. Like, it wasn't like it was an end product for them or anything. It was something they perceived bigger than them.
Yeah, and it was all about sort of creating awe and fear, and a sort of around the king, who was like the classic quote from, is it credited to Ramesses, I think, you know, look on my works and despair. That's the kind of feeling they were trying to create by doing that, to create this awe around the god and the king. And beer was one way that they did that. People that built the pyramids were paid in beer. The pyramid is, of course, a tomb. So they were all paid in beer and cloth and bread, the stuff that you needed to survive.
They weren't slaves?
No, they were not slaves. They were paid workers, you know, treated horribly.
Beer interns.
Well, we didn't have money when they were being built, so they couldn't have been paid in anything else.
Okay.
But that's what they were paid in. They were given rations of about 10 pints a day, a very weak beer, like 1.5% max.
Yeah.
So they weren't getting inebriated, but it was calories, it was liquid, and it was safe.
Got to stay hydrated in the desert, right? When you're lugging around all those stones.
There's an incredible statistic from a book I read, The Rise of the Ancient Egyptians, where I forget the writer's name, but he calculated, he was like, if the first stone of the Great Pyramid was laid when that king was born, to the day that he died, a new stone would need to have been laid every 2 minutes for it to be finished for his death.
Wild.
That's the scale that we're talking about of construction. But so, yeah, beer played a part, both as a religious thing. There was beer in the Great Pyramids, we found it. There was beer being used to pay the people that were building it. And it was a fact of daily life for the Egyptians, the Natufians, and for hundreds of years again, which is where we get finally to all of these beers. So that link between religion and beer did not die out for a long time. And in fact, most of the brewing was done either at home by what we now call alewives, so women in the kitchens cooking. Part of the cooking job was also making beer for the house, which was consumed by kids, relatives, and indeed sold if you were very good at it. The other people brewing were the monasteries. So all of the records we have, how we've sort of pieced together what beer tasted like through the centuries, how hops were first added, how barley was chosen as the predominant grain, all of that comes from the writings of abbots, of monks.
Because lay people weren't writing manuscripts for the ages.
Well, yeah, that exactly, but also the monasteries, their whole life depended on selling beer, cloth, bread,
funding
cheese
their
to
way
fund
of
it.
life.
And also through doing good work. So people like the Trappists, like we've got here, would have been giving beer to the poor because it would sustain them, and that was part of their role in God's eyes was to support the poor. So they had to brew a lot more than somebody just in their kitchens at home. So we know that hops were added or first used around 1800 because of the writings of an abbot. And it was previously, hops were used as a dye. We talked about this in our hops crash course in hops a couple of weeks ago. So all of our knowledge of brewing comes from monastery writings and from, I guess, generational experience handed down by alewives.
Isn't it amazing to think that, 13,000 years, beer didn't have hops in it? It's only the last couple of hundred years. Well, about
12,000 years it didn't, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
Crazy.
Hops are so new. And up until even more recently, barley wouldn't have necessarily been the main ingredient. So lots has changed very, very quickly, which is why when people say, why can't beer taste like beer? I just laugh because you tell me what beer tastes like. Depends when you were born and what country you're in and what you want to do with it. So that's why we've got today so much evidence of the religious impact on beer. We've got, Paulana, founded in the 17th century from the monks of St. Paulo. Augustinian monks. This was an Augustinian monastery, actually visited by the guy that founded Protestantism. Got Andex, best Weiss beer I've ever had. Got this one, supposedly the oldest brewery in the world, maybe the longest running. And this was a monastery, now makes great beer. This is the Fest beer rather than the Weiss beer, which it's famous for. Yep. It's also now a brewing school. So huge impact on the brewing world there. And then we have these monastic ones. And the reason that I put the Trappists on there is because they're kind of the only surviving true link we have.
Yeah. Because like you say, it was the religious people that were making the beer and your homemakers. They were the other people making the beer. And then it's got all commercialized and everything in the modern age, apart from Trappists, which are commercialized, but they're still religious orders.
Yeah, exactly. Just to rewind a little bit, obviously the reason why there aren't so many monastery breweries anymore is because of the Reformation, which really kicked on in the UK in terms of shutting down the breweries very quickly because Henry VIII wanted to get divorced really quick. Yeah. So he shut down all the monasteries and therefore all the breweries, decimated the brewing and the cheese.
So we've got Henry VIII to blame for only one Trappist beer in the UK.
Yeah, maybe. It was a little bit slower in most of Europe, but eventually happened as well. So all of these breweries started to secularize as religion changed, as Holy Roman emperors went, nah, that's not my kind of religion. So you're gone. And so we end up essentially with sort of commercial arms just about surviving. So, there's no Paulana monks in Munich anymore.
No.
But there is a Paulana brewery previously on the Nockerberg, now just out of town. And the same with most of these. But some of them do survive. So we still have these monastic breweries that still brew and still support their work through brewing. And if you go and stay with these monks, and you will have beer with your meals, which will be had in silence usually. And they don't see themselves as breweries; they see themselves as monasteries that happen to support themselves through beer, through cheese, through coffins. One of them makes coffins rather morbidly. Yeah. But the reason we chose to drink this beer is A, because it's one of our favourite beers in the world, B, because it's a beautiful brewery and we made a great film about it, and C, because I couldn't get hold of West Western 12. And while I think you do as well, prefer this beer.
Yeah.
I think Westfaletter 12 is much more herbal and caramelly and kind of rock candy kind of thing. This is a bit more treacle, dried fruit, sweet, complex.
It's delicious.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting because they very much trade off of, well, he kind of looks like a monk, but he's not a monk, right?
Yeah.
But he's got a very monkish look about him. St. Bernard is obviously famed, but they're no longer.
Yeah, they claim he's like a mayor or like
Yeah.
Yeah. But he definitely looks like a monk.
They don't have a Trappist status anymore.
No.
They're kind of brewed.
So
in the Trappist
they brewed Westfaletter from the
Yeah.
1940s to the early 1990s under contract. And when the Trappist movement decided to get a real definition that included brewing it in the walls,
Yes.
they lost that contract. But they kept brewing this, which is as close as we'll get to the original Westfaletter, really, because it's the same recipe and the original yeast. Whereas obviously Westfaletter now use Westmalers. But so, yeah, the reason I wanted to get Westfaletter 12 is because I wanted to tell the story of how, even today, monastic brewing and some of that classic Belgian/Catholic mysticism helps to inspire and change the world of brewing. Because as we all know, Westfaletter 12 is the best beer in the world. But it certainly doesn't hurt that it's very hard to get hold of, because you have to go straight to the monastery or get some grey market stuff. It's brewed under the supervision of monks, and in that case, like literally under supervision of monks, they are still involved in the brewing process. It has like no label on it. There's no real explanation of recipes, style, anything. It's all kind of shrouded in mystery.
What you're saying is they're kind of like the original craft hype brewery.
Yeah.
Kind of the way they're not actively marketing themselves that way, but they're kind of happenstance how it's come together.
Yeah.
Has created hype juice.
Yeah, it's scarcity marketing plus complete lack of information.
Yeah.
But ultimate hype. So this beer became famous in 2005. Actually, I've just finished a 5,000-word article about the history of Westfaletter and the impact it's had for Belgian Smack.
There you go.
But really long story short, it is the original hype beer because it became famous just as the internet was really taking off as a social platform. So it got famous on Rate Beer. It spread across forums, which then hit into like local news cycles, which then hit into national news cycles, international news cycles.
Yeah.
And the impact of this was just unreal. So, for one, it meant that there were queues at the brewery. The police had to step in and tell people to go home. They changed it to a phone line so you could order the beer in advance. The phone line got jammed because there were so many calls. So they got a national hotline number.
Monk hotline.
And people were traveling from all over the world to try and get hold of this beer.
Yeah.
Which was the first example of, the middle-aged white man queuing up outside a brewery in what became an industrial estate eventually. Every time I have a Trappist beer and I sit there and I think about it, I still think it's absolutely mad that these 100-year-old monasteries are still producing a beer in large enough scale and of good enough quality.
Yeah.
That I'm sat in my house, or I'm sat in a super trendy craft beer bar in East London, waxing lyrical about it to whoever will listen. Sorry.